The Tale of the Dragon by Emily. In the days before Arthur and his honorable knights, stories were told of a gruesome dragon that ravaged a once mighty kingdom. The king of this kingdom, in his youth, was a mighty knight and a strong fighter. Was growing old when the dragon first attacked. The dragon burned crops and villages, stole livestock, and targeted the people of the kingdom. The king sent his finest and most noble knights to attempt to kill the dragon, but none returned from its lair. For years and years, the dragon continued to torment the kingdom. The people of the kingdom were fearful of leaving their homes for more time than completely necessary. Thus, the kingdom fell into a state of despair and sheer panic. The king grew desperate for a knight to come from a faraway kingdom to save them from the terrible dragon. The king grew older and weaker every year, too old for any normal human. When the king's people began to notice his frightening age and elder appearance, he decided it was time to tell them the truth. The king called all of his people into the great hall of his castle to tell them the story of him becoming king. As the king spoke, the people stood in awe. He told them of a witch who approached him after his coronation to congratulate him on his successes and triumphs on the battlefield. The witch, who had disguised herself as a beautiful maiden, had brought him a drink to commemorate his success. Without question, the king took the cup and finished the drink, noticing too late that it was nothing ordinary. The witch had slipped him some form of potion, and he began to feel faint. The witch grabbed his arm and whispered the effects of her potion into the king's ear. The king then fainted, and the witch disappeared, never to be seen again. When the king awoke, he told no one of his encounter with the witch, until many years later, as he stood in front of his people recounting the tale. The effects of the witch's potion were that the king would not be able to die unless his kingdom was in a time of peace. The king also proclaimed that when the dragon was killed, he would be able to peacefully pass on. Also, as the king had no heir, he proclaimed that whoever slayed the dragon would take his place on the throne. This news shocked all of the people in the hall, but many lesser knights and lords were only interested in the possibility of becoming the next king. Shouts began to reverberate throughout the hall as men of all ages and royalty volunteered to attempt to slay the dragon. After 2 days of recording all the volunteers, eligible men were sent in groups of 3 to travel to the lair of the dragon. After months and months of no man returning victorious, or returning at all from the dragon's lair, the king grew desperate. And on the first day of the new year, the next group of men were sent into the dragon's lair. This group consisted of 3 extremely different men. The first was a lad of noble descent, no older than 15, who dreamt of being crowned king. Sadly for him, he was a scrawny boy and could barely lift the sword his once great father had handed down to him. The second was a mere farmer and had no noble blood within his family lineage. Since his family had no history of fighting, he had merely a dagger to use in an attempt to slay the dragon. The third man, however, was a hunter. The hunter had barely any possessions to his name, save his hunting equipment and small cottage on the outskirts of the king's land. On this journey, he brought only his hunting bow and a quiver of arrows. The 3 men walked in almost silence. The hunter, skilled at walking through forest and brush, made no sound with his careful footsteps. The farmer was heavy on his feet, seeming to step on every leaf and twig in his path. The boy was lighter on his feet, but his heavy sword dragged on the ground, causing him to resemble a child dragging their plaything behind them on the floor. The trio traveled for 2 days and nights through the thick woods until they reached a strange clearing. In this clearing, there were no trees, no flowers, no grass, and no wildlife. As the boy and the farmer began to walk through the clearing, the hunter stayed back, noticing the scorched trees, burned ground surrounding the clearing. He backed away from the open area slowly, with deliberate footsteps, sure to make no sounds. Then, by the time the boy and the farmer noticed the hunter's disappearance, the hunter was already high up in one of the trees surrounding the clearing, hidden behind the thick leaves of the tree. All of a sudden, the hunter heard a loud screech coming from above the trees. The dragon flew over the trees and over the clearing, shooting lines and lines of fire toward the other two men. The boy and the farmer began to run in opposite directions away from the aim of the dragon's mouth. The dragon began to target the farmer, as he was much slower and heavier than the young boy. The farmer ran in circles, no threat to the mightiness of the dragon, until the dragon finally swooped into the clearing and picked the farmer up using its strong jaws to crush his body in half. After killing the farmer, the dragon locked its sight on the boy. The boy, still running, had made it to the tree line. As it began to fly to attack, an arrow struck it in the neck. Another arrow stuck it in the wing, causing it to land. Confused, the dragon began to spit fire in every direction around the clearing. Still hidden, the hunter continued to fire arrows into the dragon's skin, slowing the beast down little by little with each shot. As the dragon began to be greatly affected by the wounds caused by the arrows, the hunter climbed down from the tree and moved closer to the dying dragon. When he got close enough, the hunter took his final arrow and shot the dragon in the head. The hunter, after checking that the dragon was truly dead, made sure the boy was unharmed. He then drew a vial of the dragon's blood and removed some of its scales to bring back to the king. The hunter and the boy then started their journey back to the kingdom. Upon arrival at the castle, all of the nobility were awaiting them, for the king had passed 2 days prior, meaning the dragon had been killed and a new king had emerged. The hunter was crowned the king immediately, and even though he was not born of nobility, he was one of the best kings to ever rule the land.